Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, January the 27th. And welcome to our commentary. Got to get into a couple of topics, but I want to talk about this change. I don't know if it's officially a change, but it's clearly different. Where Mr. Holman, Tom Holman, is going to Minnesota, and it looks like he's going to become the face of the immigration enforcement policy. I think that's a good move. I'm not knocking Secretary Nome. I think she's done a good job in Homeland Security, but I think when it comes to immigration, nobody I think speaks with more authority than Tom Holman. And I've been saying this from before. I just didn't start saying this because of what happened in Minnesota with the death of that person. I've said it before that I think Holman should be the one, not necessarily the Secretary of Homeland Security, because they do other things, like they got to work on storms and lots of other issues, and she can continue doing that job. But when it comes to explaining to the American people what is going on, what is behind these different projects that ICE is on, I think Holman does it better than anybody. So that's why I'm happy. Every time I see Holman on television and I see him answering questions, I keep asking myself, why isn't this man the face of the immigration enforcement policy of this administration? Why isn't he the person who is who's running the show, frankly? So I'm glad that this change has been made. He's the one who apparently is going to be negotiating with the governor of Minnesota. He's the one who's going to be on TV more. And again, it's not a knock on Secretary Noem. She's a fine person. But I think Holman is the much better candidate to be overseeing this enforcement policy. I just think he does such a great job. Plus, he's got the credibility of having done this for a long time. Remember, he was given a Medal of Service or something by President Obama's administration for basically doing the same thing. He was the immigration enforcement back then. So I'm glad. I'm glad this change has been made. I think the media wants to make it all about personalities. I don't think it is about personalities. I think it is about Holman being a better fit for that particular position of talking about the administration's immigration enforcement policy. And I hope I hope to see him. I hope to see a lot of him talking about not just Minnesota, but wherever else they're doing these things. I have a post over at the American Thinker today. As you probably know, the country has been hit by some pretty bad storms. And, we're getting some of it here in North Texas. I mean, they're already talking about closing school districts tomorrow in what we call the Metroplex, which is the Dallas-Fort Worth general area. One of the school districts in Louisville, which is a little bit to the north, has already closed and so on. And I think more will close because we're expecting a lot of ice on the streets tomorrow morning. There will be, the temperatures are going to be dropping going up this afternoon. There's not a lot of sun, so there will be some ice melting this afternoon, but it's going to refreeze a lot of it tonight. And the streets, particularly the side streets, are going to be a problem. So you don't want to have a bunch of kids in school buses or parents taking kids to school on those difficult streets. So it's probably a good idea to wait another day. I mean, what's the big deal? Wait another day and get them back to school Thursday and do whatever adjustments they have to do with the school calendar to make up for these days. But I'd rather have the kids at home than parents driving or school buses driving on those icy streets tomorrow morning. Some of these kids, get to school pretty early. Some of them, they get picked up at 7:30. And at 7:30 tomorrow morning, there's going to be a lot of ice on the streets. I can guarantee you. I can guarantee you that. Not only accidents, but people falling down, and you don't want to have that. So that's a good idea for these districts to be already calling off schools. Anyway, I wrote an article up at the American Thinker today talking about how interesting it is that you're not hearing a lot about climate change and this particular ice storm. It's an interesting topic, and this was I saw this article, editorial, I should say, at this website called Issues and Insights, and I link to them on my post or in my post, and I quote them a little bit, and I think what's happening is that the climate change people have been hit by a little bit of reality over the last year or so, that more and more these crazy predictions that they were making have not come true. I mean, you go back 10 years, go back 20 years, and read some of the predictions that former Vice President Al Gore made. None of it has happened. Now, as I mentioned in my post, I'm not saying that the climate doesn't change. I mean, the reality is that we've had climate change since Adam and Eve. There's always been, the climate has always changed for a lot of reasons. And I'm not a science guy, but just common sense tells you that, you're going to have climate change and, the earth and the sun and all this kind of stuff. And, you're going to have the climate change. And sometimes it's going to be warmer. Sometimes it's going to be colder. But what I think got the climate change movement in trouble was all the crazy predictions they were making, and also the behavior of some of their people. When you're blocking traffic, or you're going into a museum, destroying art, museums and paintings, and you're engaging in this kind of crazy irrational behavior, like the lady that went into a store and threw away all the milk or something like that because she said, I don't know, that somewhere along the line they were using fossil fuels to produce this milk. When you've got that kind of people as the face of your movement, you're not going to make a lot of friends. You're going to make a lot of enemies. And I think this is where the movement sort of became hysterically stupid, and it actually ended up hurting itself, plus all the predictions they made. So again, climate change is real. The climate has always changed, but all these crazy predictions are not real. And that's why I think a lot of people have walked away from the climate change movement, because a lot of it was just crazy stuff that they were predicting. And when I hear these people, come all these alarmist predictions, my tendency is to sort of say, wait a minute, let me hit the brakes and let me find out more about what they're talking about, because I'm not one of those who likes to see alarmist predictions, because most of the time they turn out to be wrong. I mean, that's just the way it is. So anyway, not much talk about climate change in this recent ice storm that so much of the country has been hit with. I have a post coming out tomorrow about what's happening in the Washington Post. You may know that they're having some layoffs. And as I write in my post, we don't want people to get laid off. The last thing I want to do is see people lose their jobs. But the media has a little, analysis to do. They need to look at themselves in the mirror and ask themselves, why is it that people are not buying our service anymore? Why is it that, the argument was, well, people are not buying newspapers. Well, sure, that's true. They don't read as many newspapers as they used to, but they can get the digital version. But that apparently is down too in some of these papers. And I think the problem that these organizations are having is credibility. That I think the media really lost a lot of its credibility as being fair and balanced. First of all, the way they covered Obama, where they basically put Obama on a pedestal and you couldn't say anything negative about him, because if you did, you were a racist. And then with President Trump, they went to the other extreme, with everything they had to say about President Trump was negative. I mean, it was crazy. All these Russia stories and all these other things that were being promoted that all ended up being untrue. So I think, when you engage in that kind of behavior, eventually people are going to say, I don't believe you. And as I mentioned in my post, you look at the Pew Research poll, you look at the Gallup poll, people don't believe what they're reading. They see it more and more as political narrative and not journalism. So I think that's why I say that the media has to look at itself and, just kind of look at itself and do a little self-reflection and ask themselves, how did we get it? How did this happen? And blaming the readers is not going to get you there. Blaming yourself is a good place to start, or at least understanding, why is it that so many people don't trust you? That would be a good question to begin. Why are more and more Americans thinking that you're promoting a political narrative rather than a news story or journalism? Those would be good questions for these people to ask themselves. And again, I'm not happy that they're getting laid off. Nobody's happy about that. But, the business of the media is getting more and more difficult because, unfortunately, they got a little bit too politically oriented rather than journalism oriented. Well, tomorrow, or today, I should say, on this day in history, let me put it correctly, on this day in history, 1888, so that's 138 years ago, the National Geographic was founded. Eventually, the magazine that so many of us grew up reading. The National Geographic was started, National Geographic Society, I think that's the formal name, and the magazine has been printed ever since. I don't know lately if they're still printing it or doing it online. I'm not sure. But for a long time, I remember that you would go into so many people's homes and you would see a copy of the National Geographic there on the living room table. There was always a Time magazine or Newsweek or U.S. News and World Report or whatever, and then there was National Geographic. And that seemed to be what everybody was reading, especially a lot of high school kids, I remember, would love that print publication, National Geographic. Well, it went into existence on this day 138 years ago, 1888. So congratulations to the National Geographic for being around so long. It's a good magazine. I like it. Their pictures are great. Some of the stories, I remember one time they did a story on the Amazon River. That was so fantastic. The pictures were unbelievably great. So anyway, congratulations to the National Geographic. They've been around for 138 years. That's a lot. That's a lot. So congratulations to them. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.